My family laughed. When I attended my father's funeral, then the lawyer read the will and they couldn't laugh anymore. The envelope didn't have a return address, just my name scrawled across the front in a stiff, all too familiar hand. I nearly threw it out with the rest of the junk mail, but something made me stop. My fingers trembled as I slid it open, already bracing myself for something I couldn't name. It was a funeral invitation. My father was dead. I stared at the paper, trying to feel something. Shock, sadness, anger. But everything inside me went still. It had been 10 years since I heard anything from the Moore family. A full decade since I left Charleston, and every judgmental glance, every cold shoulder, every cruel word behind. They'd made it clear I wasn't one of them anymore. I still remember the day I walked away. Caleb was just a baby, strapped into the backseat of my car while I drove with a busted lip and a suitcase full of baby clothes. I'd finally left the man who had broken more than bones, and instead of shelter, my father gave me shame. "You made your bed," he said. And that was it, but I didn't fall apart. I built a new life for us in Savannah. Quiet, small, but safe. I got a job shelving books at the library, read bedtime stories to Caleb, learned how to breathe again. And even though my father never reached out, never apologized, never asked, I still sent money. Every month, through old Mr. Gerald next door, I made sure he had what he needed. I never told anyone, especially not Caleb. Now I held this letter in my hands, and all I could think was, why now? Why invite the daughter you cast aside? Caleb must have seen my face because he came up beside me and said quietly, "You going to go?" I didn't answer. My throat was too tight. I just stared at the words on that crisp white paper. Then he added, "Maybe he left more than a will, Mom. Maybe he left something for you." I looked at my son, my anchor, my witness, and something in me shifted. I didn't know what I was walking into, but I knew this. If there was anything left to be said, I needed to hear it. So I folded the letter, packed my bags, and got ready to return to the place I swore I'd never see again. The chapel was smaller than I remembered, wooden beams overhead, stained glass muted by a gray Charleston sky. It should have felt sacred, but the air inside was heavy, sour with old perfume and even older resentment. I stepped through the double, doors with Caleb beside me, his small hand tucked tight into mine. Heads turned before we'd made it halfway down the aisle. Whispers flared like sparks. Some didn't bother hiding their surprise. Others just stared like they were watching a ghost. And then I saw them. Lindsay and Mark stood near the front. Black clothes tailored to perfection, grief applied like makeup, just enough to be noticed, not enough to smear. Lindsay's eyes locked on mine first, a flicker of disbelief. Then her lips curved, slow and sharp. "Well, well," she said under her breath, loud enough for the pews around her to catch every word. "Guess the prodigal daughter thinks there's money left." Mark let out a quiet chuckle, but his eyes didn't hold humor. Only judgment, the same kind I grew up with. I didn't answer. I just kept walking, eyes forward, spine straight, even though everything in me wanted to turn around and bolt. I found a seat at the far end of the last pew, back row, as far from them as I could get. I didn't come for them. I didn't come for drama. I came to say goodbye. Caleb slid in beside me, clutching my hand tighter. I could feel his fingers trembling. I leaned down slightly, whispered, "It's okay, baby. We're just here to sit." But I knew it wasn't okay. Not really. From up front, the preacher cleared his throat. The service began. Prayers, a few, shaky eulogies, the kind of polite mourning that sounds rehearsed, hollow. My name wasn't mentioned once. No one even acknowledged I was his daughter. They skipped from childhood memories straight to Lindsay's tireless care, Mark's business trips home to help manage things. The narrative was neat, tidy, edited. My father had died the way he lived, with a story that left me out. Caleb leaned, his head against my shoulder, quiet and still. I stared ahead, but my ears burned with every sideways glance, every snicker hidden behind a tissue. I wasn't crying, but not because I didn't want to. I'd just done all my crying years ago. When the service ended, people began to file out. A few walked past me without a glance. One older cousin offered a stiff nod, then looked away. Lindsay brushed past like I didn't exist. Mark followed, stopping just long enough to look me in the eye. "Didn't think you had the guts to show up," he murmured. I met his gaze without flinching. "Neither did I," he smirked. "Don't get comfortable. It's not your story anymore." He turned and walked off, and I sat frozen in that pew, Caleb's head still resting against me, my hand wrapped around his like it was the only real thing in the room. They didn't know I wasn't there to be in the story. I was there to finish it. The Moore family home hadn't changed. Same white columns, same red brick, same ivy curling up the porch like it was choking something beneath. But stepping through the front door after 10 years felt like walking into a freezer. Cold. Sterile. Silent in all the wrong ways. The guests had already begun to gather. Cousins, old neighbors, a few business partners. I recognized most of the faces, though none of them looked at me directly. Their conversations dropped to whispers when I entered the room, but I could feel every sideways glance like a pinprick to the skin. Lindsay stood near the fireplace, swirling. White wine in a crystal glass like it was a celebration, not a funeral. Mark leaned casually beside her, one hand tucked into his blazer pocket, the other holding a matching glass of red. They looked more like hosts at a cocktail party than children mourning their father. When they saw me enter with Caleb, Mark's mouth twisted into a grin. "Well, this won't take long," he said, loud enough for half the room to hear. "She got cut out years ago." A few people chuckled uncomfortably. Others turned away like they'd just remembered something very important on the far wall. I didn't respond. There was nothing to say. I kept my coat on, even though the fire was crackling. Caleb stayed close to my side, his small fingers clutched tightly around mine. He didn't say a word, but I could feel his eyes scanning the room, watching every movement, reading the tension the way only a child who's lived through silence and storm knows how. We took a seat near the back of the parlor, far from the hearth and the wine. I glanced around, soaking in the framed photos that still lined the walls. Lindsay in college, Mark on a boat, family vacations to Hilton Head. Not a single picture of me. Not even from when we were kids. I wasn't surprised. I'd been erased with precision. Lindsay caught my eye and smiled. Not a kind smile, a territorial one. Like I'd stepped into her kingdom uninvited. "You can sit if you want, Rachel," she said sweetly. "But don't expect a chapter." I gave her nothing. Caleb looked up at me then, and I saw it in his face. Not fear, not confusion. Focus. As if he was waiting, like something important hadn't happened yet, and somehow I knew he was right. The room fell into an awkward hush when the front door creaked open again. Thomas Dawson stepped in like a man who knew exactly what kind of mess he was walking into. Same crisp gray suit. Same leather briefcase. But this time, he carried something else too. A small cedar box, polished smooth and clutched tight under one arm. Lindsay barely looked up from her wine. Mark glanced at his watch like he had somewhere better to be. "Thank you all for being here," Mr. Dawson said, his voice low but commanding. "Per Mr. Moore's instructions, we'll begin with a video message before moving on to the formal reading." The air in the room shifted, tightened. "A video?" Lindsay scoffed, already irritated. "Can't we just get to the will? We all know what it says." Mark nodded. "Yeah, let's not drag this out. Some of us have flights." But Mr. Dawson didn't flinch. He walked past them calmly and set the cedar box on the coffee table in front of the fireplace. Then he placed his briefcase next to it and began to open the latches. "It was your father's express wish," he said, "that this be viewed before any legal matters are addressed." Lindsay rolled her eyes. Mark muttered something under his breath. A few cousins leaned forward, curiosity piqued in spite of themselves. I stayed quiet, but Caleb sat up straighter beside me. His grip on my hand loosened just slightly. I looked down at him, and his face, soft, open, was lit with something quiet but unmistakable. Hope. He didn't say a word, but I could feel it radiating from him, like he already knew. Like he'd been waiting for this moment longer than I had. And for the first time since I walked into that house, I didn't feel like I was alone. The screen flickered once, then again, before settling into focus. A faint hum filled the room, and then, there he was. My father, older than I remembered, thinner too. His once proud shoulders had slumped into something softer. His eyes, always, so sharp, so cold, were tired now, shadowed beneath a weight I couldn't name. He sat at his old oak desk, the one that used to be off limits to everyone but him. Behind him, the painting of the marsh still hung on the wall, same as it had my whole childhood. He looked directly into the camera. "If Rachel is watching this," he began, voice low, gravelly, "I owe you the apology I never gave." Every breath in the room seemed to freeze. "I was wrong," he said. "I judged you for leaving a marriage I didn't understand. I thought you were weak. I thought you were selfish. I let myself believe what I wanted to believe because it was easier than asking questions I wasn't ready to hear." He paused, his fingers twitching slightly in his lap, a nervous tick I'd never seen before. "When you showed up on my porch that night, bruised, shaking, with your baby in your arms, I should have opened the door. I should have pulled you inside and said, 'You're safe now.' But I didn't. I let pride speak louder than love." A lump formed in my throat. Caleb reached for my hand again, his little fingers folding into mine. I didn't take my eyes off the screen. I told myself I was doing the right thing, that I was teaching you responsibility. But truth is, I was punishing you for leaving, for choosing yourself, for daring to be stronger than I ever taught you to be. Behind me, I heard the subtle shifting of chairs, someone exhaling too loudly. But I didn't turn. I couldn't. Not now. "I found out the truth, Rachel. A few years ago, Gerald came by with an envelope, said it was from a friend who wanted to cover the heating bill. The handwriting, it didn't take long to figure it out." He leaned forward slightly, eyes glinting. "You sent money, every month, for years, quietly, no credit, no contact, just care. Even when I gave you nothing in return. Even when I pretended you didn't exist. You never stopped being my daughter, even when I stopped being your father." My breath hitched. I blinked, hard, trying to keep the tears from falling, but they were already there, hot, fast, silent. "I watched you from a distance," he continued. "Gerald told me how you were doing, about the library, about Caleb, said he was a bright one, said he looks at the world the way you do, with patience." He smiled then, a small, tired smile, and it broke me. "I don't deserve your forgiveness, Rachel, but if I can leave you with anything, let it be this. I was wrong. You were right. You did what I should have done a long time ago. You protected your child. You walked away from pain. And you built something better." He drew in a shaky breath. "I don't want to be remembered as the man who turned his back on his daughter. So I've changed the will. They don't know yet, but they will." Gasps fluttered around the room like startled birds. Someone cursed under their breath. Lindsay shifted sharply in her seat. Mark's jaw tensed. I barely heard them. "All I ever wanted was to be proud of my children," my father said. "And I am. Of you. Of the woman you became when I wasn't looking." The screen dimmed for a moment, then lit back up with his final words. "Tell Caleb thank you, for giving me one last chance to be a father, even if it was from a distance." Then, everything went black. Silence fell, thicker than grief. No one dared to speak. But for the first time in 10 years, I heard my father loud and clear. The screen had barely gone dark when the murmurs began. Confusion, anger, denial. Mr. Dawson didn't wait for silence. He adjusted his glasses, opened the leather folder on his lap, and said, "The video was to provide context. Now, per Mr. Moore's revised, notarized, and legally binding last will and testament, I will read the final allocations." Lindsay let out a sharp breath through her nose, like she was preparing for war. Mark folded his arms across his chest and leaned back, smug again, like the video meant nothing. To my daughter, Rachel Elaine Moore, Dawson began, his voice steady, formal. I leave the Charleston family residence, its contents, and surrounding land in full. I felt the room turn toward me, neck snapping, disbelief flashing behind every set of eyes. My hands were frozen in my lap, Caleb's still tucked inside mine. In addition, Dawson continued, I leave to Rachel Moore the sum of $250,000 in liquid assets, and all remaining balances in my retirement savings. The air shifted. He wasn't done. And to her son, Caleb Moore, I leave a college education trust in the amount of $100,000. My heart skipped. Caleb blinked up at me, his mouth slightly open, trying to understand what those words meant. I was still trying too. Dawson paused, then flipped to the final page. To my son Mark, and to my daughter Lindsay, I leave the following: a collection of family photo albums, my old military compass, and the Bible given to me by my mother when I turned 18. A gasp escaped from someone across the room. Lindsay shot to her feet. What? Her voice was sharp, high, already shaking. That's not possible. There must be a mistake. There is no mistake, Dawson said, unbothered. Your father amended the will 2 years ago. The documents are certified, witnessed, and registered with the county. Mark stood too, jaw clenched tight. He was sick. He didn't know what he was doing. He knew exactly what he was doing, Dawson replied, closing the folder with a soft snap. There was a moment of stunned silence before he spoke again, this time softer, reading from a handwritten note attached to the will. He asked me to read this aloud. Let them remember who showed up when it mattered. Let them remember who stayed quiet, but never stopped loving. This house should belong to the one person who never asked for anything and gave anyway. Lindsay stormed from the room. Mark followed after a pause, dragging disbelief like a shadow behind him. I didn't move. I couldn't. Not because I was in shock, but because for the first time in 10 years, I didn't feel erased. I felt chosen. You had to have tricked him, Lindsay snapped, her voice cracking as she spun toward me, wineglass still in hand but forgotten. There's no way he would have changed the will on his own. You must have. She stopped short, the accusation choking itself in her throat. I stood still. I didn't need to say a word. The video had already said everything. You manipulated him, she said again, louder this time, her face flushed with rage. After everything you did to this family, you waltz back in here and act like some silent saint? This is pathetic. Caleb flinched beside me, and I rested a hand on his shoulder. He didn't need protecting. I just needed to remind myself that I was still grounded, still here. Mark stepped forward now, voice low but seething. We'll challenge it. There's no way this holds. He wasn't well. He was confused. Mr. Dawson didn't blink. Your father's will was amended 2 years before his health declined. He was of sound mind. It's witnessed, notarized, and on file with the court. There is no legal ground for dispute. Mark opened his mouth to argue again, but stopped when he saw Dawson's calm stare. The kind of stare that came with decades, in courtrooms and zero patience for entitled theatrics. Around us, the rest of the room had gone still. Some of the cousins were whispering now, others slipping out through the side door, coats clutched awkwardly, faces turned away from mine. No one wanted to look me in the eye. Not out of hatred this time, but out of something closer to guilt. Maybe shame. Lindsay's breathing had turned uneven. She looked like she didn't know whether to cry or scream. Her hands shook as she set, the wineglass down too hard on the sideboard. This is a joke, she muttered. It's a damn joke. She turned and walked out without another word. Mark followed a few seconds later, his jaw clenched so tightly I thought it might crack, and just like that, the room emptied. They thought they'd buried me 10 years ago, but I was still here, and now they were the ones running. The room was quiet now. Not awkward quiet, not tense, but still. Settled. I stayed where I was for a long moment, Caleb beside me, his small hand resting in mine. His grip had loosened, but he hadn't let go. Neither had I. No one else was left in the room. The murmur of retreating voices had faded down the hall. Doors clicked shut. Footsteps disappeared. I rose slowly and walked toward the corner of the room where the old leather reading chair sat tucked beneath the bay window. It was still there, unchanged, faded at the arms, creaking at the joints, worn into the shape of the man who once called it his throne. I stared at it for a second, then reached down and gently brushed my fingertips along the top edge. "Goodbye, Dad," I whispered. "I forgive you." The words didn't catch in my throat. They didn't burn or twist, they just landed, like they had been waiting too. Behind me, Caleb didn't speak. He didn't need to. The fireplace crackled softly, casting a warm orange glow over the room. The photographs on the mantel, the worn floorboards, even the air. It all felt different. Now, not hostile, not heavy, just calm. I turned to look around the house one more time. For the first time in years, it didn't feel like a place that had banished me. It felt like a home that had finally exhaled. Maybe some ghosts don't leave. Maybe they just wait for the right words, and I had finally said mine. Weeks later, the boy. House was quiet in a different way. The kind of quiet that comes after a storm. Not destruction, but stillness. Peace. Caleb had claimed the sunroom for his art supplies. Every morning I found him there sketching cardinals, blue jays, wrens, every bird he could spot in the backyard trees. His laughter sometimes echoed through the hallway, soft and bright, filling spaces that used to ache. One morning, a letter arrived in a plain white envelope. No return address, but I recognized the handwriting. Gerald Adams. I opened it carefully. "Hands steady," he cried. "Rachel," the note read. "The day he realized it was you. I'd never seen your father look so small. He carried that truth with him until the end." I folded the letter and stepped out onto the porch. Caleb sat on the top step, sketchpad on his knees, tongue between his teeth as he shaded in a hawk's wings. I looked out over the lawn, the oak trees swaying gently in the breeze. "He saw me in the end," I said aloud, not to anyone in particular. The girl they erased hadn't disappeared. She'd just been waiting for the truth to find its way home.